Greetings, programs, and welcome back to the TV thing. This time round, I'm going to talk about Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, and I have to qualify this because there's been a BBC adaptation not that many years ago, which had Stephen Mangan in the starring role, but much more recently there has been a co-production between BBC America and Netflix, who was... I think it aired first on BBC America, but Netflix was a production partner, so they basically put some money in towards it. So, there's been a first season of, it's either 8 or 10 episodes. I think it was 8, because I was expecting it to be 10, and then I was surprised when it wrapped up around episode 8. And it's different. I think the thing to say is it's not any kind of straight adaptation of any of the existing material. It doesn't really bear that much relation to the BBC series. It takes quite a different tone. That was a bit more faithful to the books, but there was some divergence there. And I think that's in part because Dirk Gently is quite a difficult character to encapsulate. He's a bit nebulous in the books. He's not... I mean, you think of Douglas Adams's more famous work, the Hitchhiker's Guide series, and the characters there are all very sharply defined, but in Dirk Gently, I think they're purposely a bit more kind of fuzzy and vague. So I think Mangan did fairly well as in his portrayal of Dirk Gently. But with Samuel Barnett, who I didn't recognise him at first, but then reading about it online, I saw he'd been in the History Boys, and it suddenly pegged where I'd seen his face. He brings something a bit different to the role. So it's a good thing that they got a British actor to stick with being Dirk Gently, but he's not really the Dirk Gently of the books so much, and just the show as a whole, it uses some of the idea of Dirk Gently, primarily the whole holistic thing, and it kind of uses that as a jumping off point for this series. So we get some brief reference to prior events. So basically they make a little reference to the books. I think second, third episodes, can't remember exactly. But if you're expecting this to be like the writing of Douglas Adams, it's not really, but it jumps off in a good way, though. It uses the books as an inspiration, and it kind of goes to take its own direction, and it actually succeeds, I think, more or less. Now, I'm not going to say that I thought it was a great show, but it was entertaining enough, and I think the cast was good enough, especially, and the soundtrack was good enough that it all added up to being something that was actually okay. Now, on the cast, for his unwitting, sort of unwilling, but gradually more willing sidekick, we have Elijah Wood. And his name, by the way, I always want to go, oh, he would he? Because my brain is just smart ass like that. But they also had some other reasonably well-known faces. In a couple of episodes, they had... the name... I'm going to have to look this name up. Richard Schiff, there we go. The guy from the West Wing. I was trying very hard not to say Toby Ziegler, but basically, yes, Toby Ziegler was in some of the episodes. The other person that was quite interesting was Fiona Dourif, who, as it turns out, is in fact the daughter of Brad Dourif, who has had some quite famous sci-fi roles. And it's one of those things, again, it's like, her face looks kind of familiar, but I don't think I've seen her in anything before. And then when I saw in the credits Dourif, I thought, okay, yes, she does look quite like her father. So there's another sort of familiar face. But she was quite interesting, and her character, and this is one of the parts where it completely departs from the books, is that Gently's character, or the character of Dirk Gently in the series, is quite young. And his background is quite different from the books, evidently. But his ability, if I can put it that way, is basically the same, where he just kind of blunders into things, and he's developed this sense that, well, if he blunders into things, it's because he's meant to blunder into them. And you've got Fiona Dory playing this character, Bart Curlish, who is basically, I'm not going to say, I came up with a phrase for this, and I'm probably being overly clever, but she's not the opposite side of the same coin. She's the same side of a different coin entirely. So there you go. That's my little soundbite for the episode. Basically, she is much like Dirk in that she goes places and has developed this idea that she's, she ends up where she's meant to be, because that's kind of the conceit of the whole Dirk Gently idea, is that he just ends up where he's meant to be. But in her case, it's to kill people. And she gets into her head that she has to kill Dirk Gently, and of course they eventually end up meeting face to face, and it's actually quite a reasonably funny moment. But yeah, she makes a really interesting counterpoint, because Gently, as he is played by Barnett, you kind of... It's actually, I mean, the characterization's quite good. He's very facile and seems quite carefree when you first see him, but as the show goes on, he is uncovered to be a sort of, in some ways, quite a brittle character, which would make sense given his, air quotes, profession. And then on the flip side, Bart Curlish, who... It really is like she basically can go around and do what she does with no consequences because of the way her powers work, or her whatever. And there's a really interesting moment where suddenly it kind of fails her, and just the reaction to that, and you start to realise how she is the way she is, because her life up to now has meant that she can just do stuff without consequences, and you can imagine what that would do to a person long term. It kind of calls back to the character of, the central female character, and I can't remember her name, of Larry Niven's Ringworld. And the whole thing with that character is that she is genetically lucky, which makes no sense, but it does in the context of the book. And basically she goes through her life without being hurt up until all the adventures they have even on the Ringworld. So the point is that there's quite an interesting character arc along the way. And so when the two finally meet face to face, you end up with this... it's probably one of the best moments of the series, actually, just in terms of the reactions that they both have, because they've never met up until that point. So the series as a whole, it's very un-British, because there's lots of guns and shooting, and there's a bit of conspiracy theory going on. But at its heart, I think it's not too far distant from the kind of thing that Douglas Adams might have written in the case of as it's uncovered what's actually happening and how people are acting, basically. Because you end up with there's this kind of semi-mystical cult, and there's a bizarre machine, and we eventually learn what the machine does. And some of the ideas actually are quite closely related to, I want to say, The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul, but I can't remember if it was that one. It might have been the first one, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. But it's... You can see the antecedents from the work of Douglas Adams, but it kind of evolves it into something a bit different. And the fact that they're doing another series, I'm quite interested to see where it goes, because it ends on... I try and avoid spoilers, as always, but it ends on a note where they could have wrapped it up and said everything's worked out. But they kind of purposely went, well, actually, there's some stuff left to resolve. So if there hadn't been another series, it would have been a bit having them left it like that. But the fact that there is going to be another series, I definitely want to see it, because overall it took a little while to grow on me, but it did grow on me, and I initially thought the fact that we had this young Dirk Gently who doesn't really seem like Dirk Gently would just put me off. But no, they've kind of made it their own thing in a fairly good way. So Yeah, I can kind of recommend this one, even if you're a diehard Douglas Adams fan. You might be able to pick up stuff from it that you end up quite liking. But on the other hand, if you're a really diehard Douglas Adams fan, you might just hate the fact that they're running around with guns and there's lots of shooting and stuff. But no, it's just everything, I think, pulls it together as being quite an entertaining show. And I will, before I wrap this up, take a moment to particularly praise the music, because it is by Cristobal Tapia de Villa, who, of course, did the soundtrack for Utopia, which I've covered on the channel before. Now, the Utopia soundtrack for Series 1 and 2 is fantastic. It's one of the better TV soundtracks of the last decade. In fact, if not the best. Although, having said that, Battlestar Galactica Air, that had some pretty bitchy music in places. I'm trying to think what else has, on TV has had good music in the last 10, 12, whatever years. But I mean, if I had to pick something, it would be Utopia. And although it is rather more understated for this, it's still very, very much in his style. Though we don't have the strong themes, but there's still that kind of unmistakable sound that is definitely his. And it kind of fits really well, because the whole air of the thing is supposed to be slightly unreal and weird. And you basically, like Elijah Wood as the sidekick character, Todd Brotzman, he's sort of introduced as the regular guy that we're seeing all this through the eyes of, and isn't it all weird? And then we do eventually start to learn that he's not exactly quite a normal guy himself. But the music fits in very well with that tone. And that's something that Cristobal Tapia de Villa actually, he really does bring that slightly slanted view of reality to things with the kind of music that we get. So, yeah, that is something even that I would definitely pick out for particular praise. So, hopefully you have enjoyed this episode and found the recommendation useful, because I do definitely recommend it. And if you have, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.